Welcome to History Gone Viral. My name is Becky Liner, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the James Madison Institute. The James Madison Institute has a Center for American Ideals, and through that center, we do civics education initiatives throughout the year and reach students from kindergarten through college. Today, we're presenting our very first installment of History Gone Viral in celebration of Bill of Rights Day. I'd like to introduce you now to my colleague, Bill Maddox, who will be our moderator for the day. Bill?
Thank you, Becky. It's my pleasure today to welcome to our first History Gone Viral, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, who I see is bundled up today. Dr. Franklin, what gives?
Well, it is a bit on the cool side today, as it is in mid-December, or almost mid-December. But I think you're referring to the face covering. And
yes,
from what I have gathered in my wanderings, there is another plague going about the area. And just like in Philadelphia City, when we would have scarlet fever or yellow fever or even smallpox, we would try to protect ourselves with masks in the hopes that it would help keep us safe from the plague or the other maladies that are about. But sir and madam, would you mind if I do remove the mask, as I feel that we could converse much more clearly? If that is acceptable to you, I shall remove it.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly acceptable. We appreciate your courtesy and sensitivity.
Yeah, thank you. And
so
it does feel better without.
Yes. So we're talking today about the Bill of Rights and your role in the nation's founding. You're one of only 4 people to, and certainly the most famous of the 4, to have signed both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And of course, the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments that were added to the Constitution soon after its adoption. And we're going to be talking some about that, and perhaps especially about the First Amendment that included a right that's, I know, very near and dear to you, which is freedom of the press. But before we get into any of that, you made reference to Philadelphia City and your time there, and we obviously associate you with Philadelphia. But you grew up actually in Boston, and I seem to recall that your first invention, and we know of many inventions, but your first invention was a child play toy of sorts that you invented while you were a lad there in Boston. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, I believe you're referring to the swimming paddles that I had contrived. As a youth, and even now as an adult, I always enjoyed swimming. I found it quite relaxing, good exercise. But there were times, especially swimming on the Charles River, that I would want to go against the current, and that was quite strenuous. So what I found is that when I fashioned paddles to attach to my hands and feet, it allowed me to propel myself through the water even against the current with much more ease and speed. Totally amazing all of my friends at how easily and quickly I was able to traverse the water, not only along the surface, but under it as well. And I found it great fun. And hopefully someone else will pick up on that idea and maybe improve on it.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that many years after your first trips up the Charles River with that, there are many young people today who continue to use flippers and other things to propel them through the water when they are swimming. Okay. So as I mentioned, you have a special appreciation for freedom of the press, because though many people may not associate this with you, your occupation for many years was that of a newspaper man, a printer. And so you obviously have an appreciation for freedom of the press. I'm curious to know how you got started writing articles and things for newspapers. Tell us a little about your first experiences in the newspaper world.
Well, After just a very few years of schooling, 3 years of schooling to be exact, my father determined that I might better be apprenticed and learn a trade. And I was apprenticed to my brother John, who was a printer and also published the Boston Gazette. As such, I was learning composition. And as I learned the trade of printing, how to compose, it came to me that maybe I should try my hand at writing articles. Knowing my brother would never publish a letter or an article written by his younger brother, especially an apprentice, I disguised my handwriting and took on the guise of a middle-aged widowed woman in the area of Boston, making commentary on the foibles and humorous aspects of public and private life in and about Boston, signing them as Mrs. Silence Dogood. I would then, in the middle of the night, slip these letters under my brother's office door. Of course, I knew that he was reading them when he would discover them, but he was also showing them to his friends who encouraged him to print those letters. And they did turn out to be quite popular throughout the city of Boston. But I must say, as a young man, my pride did take hold. And I informed my brother as to the true author of Mrs. Silence Dogood's letters. And I can still feel the pain of his response on my back. And I think at that point, I started to develop a great dislike for tyranny.
Mm. Well, it's quite a story. So your first writings were as Mrs. Silence Dogood, which is just fascinating. But of course, many of us associate you perhaps most with another pen name that you chose, that of Poor Richard, Poor Richard's Almanac, in which you would annually produce all sorts of writings and words of advice and lots of proverbs and information of interest, obviously, to people in agriculture and other things. One of the sayings that was included in the many bits of advice that you offered is one that I'd be particularly interested in having you unpack for us today. And that is, the saying goes, as I seem to recall, something like, if you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas. Is that right?
If you lie down with or lie among dogs, you shall arise with fleas. And that was mere observation on many parts. How many times have you seen a dog that has been washed and cleaned and turned loose by his master? And one of the first things he will do is roll in the mud, and then he will lay with other dogs to keep himself warm or for companionship. But when that dog comes home, does he not have fleas again? And especially for our youth, if they accompany others that have maybe not such good ideas or intentions, will not some of those habits, bad habits, if you will, rub off on the other youth and just seem to spread discontent? And youth will have mischief, but sometimes this mischief is spread. So you lie down with dogs, you will arise with fleas.
So a kind of word of warning about the importance of keeping good company and being careful about who you associate with. I think that's actually quite apt. You continued throughout all of your publishing life to offer words of advice. Later wrote a book that was a bestseller, The Way to Wealth, that had a lot of advice, especially about money management and the concept of thrift. And we're going to be talking with you again next month about that important concept. But I'm curious to know, sayings like a penny saved is a penny earned have become very commonplace that were first penned by you. And I'm just curious to know where you first gained your appreciation for the value of money and the importance of being careful about not spending too much and about saving what you can and that sort of thing.
Well, it was about the time I was about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years of age. And my oldest brother, James, was a seaman, a sailor. And on one of his journeys, he returned to Boston, visited us in our home. And as a present, he gave to all of my brothers and sisters and myself a few coins so that we could go and purchase what sweets or other trinkets we may want. After thanking him for the present, I ran off and down the street to see what goods I could find, and I soon came across another lad that was making wonderful music with a tin whistle. And I thought for sure that if I had that whistle, I could make this wonderful music as well. So I offered up all of my coins to this lad for his tin whistle, and of course he agreed to the bargain. So I go parading home, blowing on the whistle, making to me wonderful music. And when I went into the house, told my brothers and sisters of the wonderful bargain I had made, they broke out laughing, guffawing, making fun of me. And they informed me that for but a fraction of one coin, I could have bought a new whistle and have money left over for other purchases or for saving. And at that age, at that time, I started to learn the value of money and what monies could do.
Mm, that's a great story. Yeah, no, and I can easily see how that would have made the kind of impression on you that would cause you from then on to think differently. I want to move now to your adult life and to the part of your adult life that we especially are interested in today, since we're celebrating Bill of Rights Day. And that is your kind of role as a statesman, as a founding father, one of the most famous, and again, as I mentioned, one of only two to sign both the Declaration and the Constitution. And I think one of the things that a lot of people imagine or suspect is that all of you who were involved in these really important deliberations were just like the best of friends and got along famously and were very much of one mind and really enjoyed each other's company. And so I have to imagine, especially since you grew up in Boston, in Massachusetts, that say John Adams, the second president of the United States, the first vice president, would have been just a favorite founding father of yours. Tell us about your relationship with Mr. Adams.
Well, I will say, Mr. Adams always worked very hard, very diligently, very honest man, well knowledge in the law. But he and I did not see eye to eye on many subjects. When we were in France together, I was so relieved when Congress asked him to go to Holland to work for assistance. Because frankly, sometimes I think the man was quite out of his mind.
Mm.
But getting back to the actual question as I heard it, many of the delegates were not of equal mind during both the Continental and the Constitutional Conventions. At times, some of the delegates almost came to blows. Some even threatened to fight duels. But cooler heads prevailed. We were there not to argue amongst ourselves so much, but to try to fight for our independency, and then after the Articles of Confederation proved not to be so workable, we had to come together and form a new constitution. But we did not always see eye to eye on many subjects. And with much discussion, much arguing, sometimes quite loudly, as I've said, we had to learn to compromise. And at another time, I know our time is limited, but another time I will talk about a story that I gave in the halls of the convention. But again, I will save that for another time.
Well, let me ask you to tell a little bit more. You've spoken about John Adams, and you weren't certainly the only one to sometimes have difficulty with him. I know Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, especially around the election of 1800 when they were running against each other, were often at odds with one another. And many people compare the rancor and political division of our day to what was experienced back then between Jefferson and Adams. But I know that they patched things up before dying and actually ended up passing on the same day. The anniversary, 50th anniversary, in fact, of the signing of the Declaration. So these kinds of difficulties and problems can be worked through, and certainly the work product that you guys produced was a great one. Obviously, in that Constitutional Convention, the person that was presiding over it all was General George Washington, whom I know you had a lot of respect for. And I seem to recall you telling me something at one point about a chair that was in the room, and something about how how General Washington, maybe the chair he was sitting in. Tell us a little bit more about this.
I remember this quite clearly. General Washington, as president of the Constitutional Convention, sat slightly on a riser with his desk. He was very quiet during all the deliberations, but I kept looking at the chair that he was sitting in, and carved into the back of the chair was a half of a sun. And many of us were wondering, was that a rising sun, a setting sun? Many times during the convention, I was sure it was a setting sun. But as we got to the point where we were drawing closer and closer together with our understanding and our acceptance of different delegates and different states' ideas, we were finalizing the course of our Constitution. And on the day that we signed the Constitution to adopt it, to then send to the states for its ratification, I looked at General Washington's chair, and at that moment, I realized that this carving of the sun was in fact that of a rising sun, to me indicating the birth of a new nation, a form of government that had never been seen before on the face of the earth. So it was in fact a rising sun.
Well, I think you were very prescient, because that has, in fact, that Constitution that you guys adopted and signed, has lived on longer than any other Constitution of any other country, and has been a great help to all of us who followed in your wake. I seem to recall that soon after you guys had finished, the way the story I first heard it was that a young boy came to you and asked a question about just kind of what you had done. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I remember this as well. After all of us signed on the Constitution, it was being prepared to be sent out to the states. We exited the State House, what is now called Independence Hall. And it wasn't a young lad that had called out, but it was a woman in the crowd. And she called to me, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And I looked at her and said, Madam, you have a republic. It is up to you to be able to keep it. And we went along in our various ways. And I say to everyone listening, you have been given a republic. It is up to you to keep it so.
Very good. Yeah, no, that's a great closing word for us, really, because with each succeeding generation, it's important for the privileges that we enjoy as Americans, for the important responsibilities that we have as citizens, to be understood and to be carried on and to be passed down to each new generation, because these things are fragile, can be lost, and we don't want to lose them. And the Bill of Rights is certainly an important addition to that Constitution. No document is perfect. You guys understood that when you adopted it. You recognized that there would be a need for amendments. You put in an amendment process, and though it hasn't been amended a lot, it has had a number of important amendments added, including those first 10 that we are celebrating today. Dr. Franklin, we greatly appreciate you being with us. We'll look forward to seeing you again next month when we celebrate Thrift Week and talk to you more about some of your ideas about money management. With that, I'm going to kick things back to Becky Liner for some closing words.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Franklin. And we thank all of you for joining us today for this very first installment of History Gone Viral. If you have any questions about the James Madison Institute or our civics education programs, we encourage you to visit our website at www.jamesmadison.org. Thank you.